The rain hammered down on Roosevelt Avenue like machine gun fire. Each drop exploded against the cracked asphalt, gleaming under the sickly yellow streetlights on the forgotten edge of downtown Chicago. Steam hissed from manholes, forming ghostly pillars that twisted upward into the November darkness, while the smell of wet concrete mingled with exhaust fumes and the metallic tang of rust bleeding from fire escapes and chain-link fences. Marcus Chen pulled his thin hoodie tighter around his 17-year-old frame. The fabric was already soaked through, clinging to his shoulders like a second skin that offered no warmth, no protection from the storm bent on washing away everything he'd fought to hold together. His sneakers squelched with every step, water seeping through holes he'd meant to patch with duct tape for weeks. In his right pocket, 23 crumpled dollar bills pressed against his thigh, 3 hours of scalding dishwater and endless plates at Romano's diner. Money that meant more than just wages, it was survival. His fingers still burned from the industrial soap that stripped skin raw, leaving his knuckles cracked and bleeding where the harsh chemicals had eaten away at flesh that never quite healed between shifts. His lower back ached from hunching over steel sinks that never seemed to empty, a constant reminder of the price his body paid for every dollar earned. All Marcus could think about was the empty prescription bottle on their kitchen counter. His mother's name printed in neat pharmacy labels that might as well have been in a foreign language for all the hope they offered when the bank account held more prayers than pennies. The diabetes medication cost more than a week's wages, more than their rent, more than the fragile math of survival allowed. Without it, his mother's condition would spiral beyond what their threadbare insurance could cover, beyond what love and determination could heal through sheer will. "Mama's going to be okay," he whispered to himself, the words lost in the storm's fury. But he needed to hear them, needed to believe those $23 could somehow stretch to cover her insulin until his next shift. That the math would work out differently this time, even though it never had before. The memory of her face that morning, pale and drawn, hands shaking as she pretended to drink coffee that was mostly hot water because they'd run out of grounds 3 days ago, burned brighter than the flickering neon signs behind rain-streaked windows of pawn shops and liquor stores lining his route home like sentinels of broken dreams. 3 blocks ahead, their apartment building rose like a broken tooth against the skyline, its brick facade stained by decades of weather and neglect. Windows dark except for the occasional flicker of television light suggesting life still clung to those walls despite everything working against it. Somewhere on the 4th floor, behind a door marked 4B in peeling gold numbers, his 10-year-old sister Lily sat at their wobbly kitchen table, probably still struggling with the fractions homework he'd promised to help with before his shift started 12 hours ago. Waiting for him like she did every night since their father walked out 6 months earlier, with nothing but a mumbled apology and a suitcase too small to hold all his broken promises. The thought of her small face pressed against the rattling windowpane, watching for him through the wind-whipped glass, pushed Marcus forward through puddles that had become small lakes. Past the bodega where Mrs. Rodriguez always asked about his mother with eyes full of sympathy he couldn't afford to accept. Past the bus stop where kids his age huddled under graffiti-covered plexiglass that had become its own kind of abstract art. Past the church with its broken cross and boarded windows that had stopped offering sanctuary when the congregation couldn't keep the lights on anymore. Marcus kept his head down, counting steps toward home, when a sound cut through his desperate calculations, a deep mechanical wheeze followed by the frustrated growl of an engine refusing to catch. Then silence heavier than the rain itself. He stopped mid-stride, water cascading down his face as he peered through the downpour at the massive shape hunched against the curb like a prehistoric beast brought low. The motorcycle was enormous, chrome and black steel dulled by relentless rain. Its engine block steamed in the cold night air, the acrid smell of burned oil stinging his eyes. Beside it stood a mountain of a man whose leather jacket had seen more miles than Marcus could imagine, decades of road dust, desert sun, and stories that would terrify most people. But right now, all Marcus saw was someone else caught in the storm's merciless grip. The man's beard dripped steadily, his massive hands resting gently on the handlebars, a tenderness at odds with his imposing presence. Hands that shook not from cold, but from something deeper. A look painfully familiar to the teenager who knew what powerlessness felt like against forces designed to crush you. "Damn thing picked a hell of a night to die on me," the man muttered, voice like gravel mixed with honey, a note of defeat wrapped in false bravado that reminded Marcus of his father's final weeks. The leather vest bore patches Marcus didn't recognize: skulls, wings, Gothic script speaking of brotherhood and territory. But patches didn't matter when you were stranded in a storm that spared no one. "Need help pushing it?" Marcus called out, barely audible over the rain's assault on metal and concrete. The man looked up, eyes the color of winter storms, weathered, hard, but surprised, as if kindness from strangers had become rarer than he'd ever expected. For a moment they studied each other across the flooded street, the mountain of leather and muscle from a world Marcus had only glimpsed in movies, and the skinny kid in the soaked hoodie who barely looked old enough to drive. Something unspoken passed between them, beyond age, appearance, or circumstance. "You sure about that, kid?" the man asked, genuine concern in his voice, as if trying to protect Marcus from something. But Marcus was already stepping forward, positioning himself at the rear wheel, hands gripping whatever solid metal he could find. The bike weighed more than anything he'd ever tried to move, anchored to the asphalt like it was born from the street itself. Yet when he threw his full weight into it, the man mirrored him, and together they began coaxing the beast forward through rust-red water. "Tank," the man said between labored breaths, offering the name like a gift. Marcus gave his own in return, oddly honored by the simple exchange as they navigated pothole lakes, their combined effort creating a strange rhythm in the storm's chaos. 3 city blocks stretched like an endless gauntlet of flooded asphalt and flickering neon. Each step a battle against the bike's tremendous weight and the storm's assault on their exhausted bodies. Marcus's lungs burned, his thin frame straining against forces determined to break him. But Tank's quiet determination kept him moving, focused on the splash of their footsteps through puddles reflecting the city's lights like shattered mirrors. "You don't have to do this, you know," Tank said as they paused at a flickering red light, his massive chest heaving. The tone suggested this simple act of kindness had caught him completely off guard. Marcus wiped rain from his eyes, tasting salt, city grime, and the metallic flavor of his own stubbornness, his refusal to let go when someone needed help, even a stranger from a different orbit. "My dad used to say you help people when they're down, no matter who they are," Marcus replied before he could stop himself, and immediately wished he hadn't opened that wound in front of this man whose scars likely ran deeper than a 17-year-old could imagine. But Tank just nodded slowly, an acknowledgement suggesting he understood absent fathers and the lessons they left behind, good and bad. They leaned back into the bike as the light turned green, and the city swallowed them again. The neon sign of Tony's all-night garage appeared through the rain like a beacon, red and blue letters buzzing with electricity, casting strange shadows across the flooded street. Tank's posture visibly relaxed, sanctuary finally in reach. The bay doors stood open, spilling fluorescent light over wet pavement. Inside, Marcus glimpsed silhouettes of other motorcycles, chrome gleaming under industrial fixtures, turning the space almost cathedral-like in its mechanical devotion. Almost there, Tank breathed, voice carrying more than relief, something approaching reverence, as if this place meant far more than just repair or shelter. As they guided the massive bike through the entrance, other men emerged from the shadows, all leather, muscle, and faces that had seen hard roads. But their expressions softened when they saw Tank, their captain, safe. "Who's the kid?" one asked, voice laced with the familiar suspicion Marcus knew from his own neighborhood, trust earned, never given. Tank's response cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "This kid pushed my bike 3 blocks through this storm when he could have just walked on by." His hand fell heavily on Marcus's shoulder, protection and benediction at once. The garage fell silent except for rain drumming on metal and the hum of fluorescent lights illuminating a moment Marcus would remember forever. When Tank turned fully to him, rain streaming down his weathered face like unshed tears, Marcus saw something in those winter storm eyes that took his breath away, not the hardness or danger his mother would have warned about, but deep recognition. Understanding between people who knew the weight of burdens that could crush you. The tough exterior cracked just enough to reveal something unexpectedly tender, a man whose walls around his heart had been breached by a 17-year-old who stopped to help in the rain. "Kid, you have no idea what you just did for me," Tank said, voice thick with emotion the storm couldn't wash away. He reached into his jacket with almost ceremonial deliberation and pulled out a well-worn business card, edges softened by countless miles and memories. Simple black with white lettering that seemed to glow under the harsh lights. Tank Morrison, Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. When you need family, call. He pressed it into Marcus's palm, his massive hands completely engulfing the boy's smaller ones. Marcus felt the warmth of the older man's skin, the weight of whatever promise this simple card represented. Anything you need, anytime, you call that number. Around them, the other bikers nodded approval, respect for the skinny kid who'd helped their captain without asking for anything in return. Marcus stared at the card through dripping hair, not grasping its magnitude. Not knowing the patches marked Tank as captain of the most feared motorcycle club in 3 states. Not realizing his simple act of kindness had just earned him the protection and loyalty of men who would ride through hell for each other. The moment stretched like a bridge between 2 worlds. The successful businessman Tank had once been recognizing something of his younger self in this kid who washed dishes to keep his family afloat, who helped strangers push broken bikes through storms because it was right. Then Tank disappeared into the brightly lit bay, surrounded by his brothers like a living wall, leaving Marcus alone in the rain with $23, a business card, and the strange sensation that his life had just shifted in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. 6 months would pass before Marcus truly understood the weight of that rain-soaked promise. When the insurance company tried to evict his family after his mother's accident. When hope felt as distant as that November night. He would remember Tank's words with perfect clarity and reach for the worn business card that had waited in his wallet like a lifeline he never thought he'd need.